Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Astro Show, the place to be if you're curious about the cosmos. I'm your host, Dr. Sam, the founder and executive director of Wyoming Stargazing. Here, you can pick the brains of astrophysicists, get advice from an aerospace doctor, learn what scientists have to say about life, and find out about what's going on up above your head, all in the same place. So, thank you for joining us tonight and the second and fourth Tuesday of every month at 6 p.m. Mountain Time on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. In this week's show, we have the one and only co-star of the Astro Show, Dr. Dani Carroll, as our special guest. And so Dr. Dani is going to tell us all about her work as the founder of Orbital Biodesign in designing aerospace technology. So we will hear all about that later on this evening. But before we get to that, let's welcome our co-stars. First, astronomer and data visualization engineer at the Adler Planetarium, it's Dr. Lauren Corleys.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, now we can hear you, Lauren. Thanks for joining us. Mm-hmm. And next, we have astronomer and host of her own YouTube show, Nora's Guide to the Galaxy. It's Dr. Nora Bailey.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, Nora. And our special guest, who needs no introduction, Dr. Dani Carroll.
Hey, everybody. Good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being with us, Dani. And thanks so much for being willing to share the latest on your endeavors with designing aerospace technology. We are excited to hear about all that later on in the show.
Sure thing.
All righty. Well, let's bring the slideshow back up and let's get started. I want everybody here with me. How do we do this? That's really weird. Usually when I click this button, everything works great. There we go. All right. Now we are all here. So lots of good stuff for tonight. But first, a special shout out and welcome to Dr. Dani.
Yay.
And let's get started with Astro Advice. So here's the quotation for this evening. And then there are 4 options for the 3 of you to guess who it might actually have been said by. The saddest aspect of life right now is that it gathers knowledge faster than society gathers wisdom. So 4 choices for who may have said that. A, Diane Ackerman, the novelist and poet from the US. Number 2, Isaac Asimov, the notable science fiction writer. I didn't know this about him. He was apparently a biochemist, professor at Boston University. But yeah, wrote incredible science fiction. Oliver Heaviside, whose name I hadn't come across before. It turns out that he actually wrote the most modern rendition of Maxwell's equations, which really led to their modern day understanding in terms of how they interplay with electromagnetic radiation. So it was really this guy who made that all possible, among lots of other incredible stuff that he did in mathematics. He actually completely independently developed vector calculus. So yeah, big time player, but not well known, at least to me. I'd never heard of him before. But that's option C. And last but not least, Alice Ball, who I had also not heard of before. Absolutely amazing woman. Before the age of 24, when she very unexpectedly and way too early in life passed away. But by that age, she had already become the first woman and first African-American to receive a master's degree from the University of Hawaii, and also became the first woman, an African-American chemistry professor. This is all before the age of 24. And so, yeah, not much is known about what she might have been, potentially capable of, but obviously like incredible scientific aptitude to do all of that at such a young age. So a tragic loss at a very young age. But those are your 4 possibilities: Diane Ackerman, Isaac Asimov, Oliver Heaviside, and Alice Ball, excuse me. So, what do you think?
I'm going to go with A.
One vote
Not really sure.
for Diane Ackerman from Dr. Dani.
I'm going to go with B because it sounds like something a writer would say, and those were very killer mutton chops. So
Those were pretty killer mutton chops. I hadn't seen that picture of him before
Me
either.
either. I was like, what is this?
There were more like professional, astute pictures, but that's the one I like.
That was a good choice.
Thank you. Yeah, Maggie actually picked that one out. I approved. Definitely approved. Lauren?
I was going to guess B too. I'm going to switch it up. I'm not going to distribute it. I'm going to go with B.
Votes for Isaac Asimov. And the correct answer was
Oh.
nicely done.
The
So
mutton chops strike
Good job,
again.
guys.
yeah,
Always bet on the mutton chops.
all about those mutton chops.
Yeah.
So one point for Nora and 1 point for Lauren. So what do you think about this?
It's probably true.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, sadly, right?
Mhm.
As you
I
said.
Probably the only thing I would disagree with is that I don't think that's an aspect of life right now. I think that's probably just an aspect of life throughout time, but
Human
it certainly
nature.
feels sometimes like it's uniquely a current day problem. But
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that, Nora. I just read an article in it was either the New York Times or New York Magazine, I can't remember which, specifically about how our brain plays tricks on us, that now is the worst time. And there turns out there's some neurological aspects of how our brain processes memory and how our brain processes negative versus positive events that lead to us believing that now is the worst time, even though it's probably one of the best times to be alive in all the history of humanity. But that's not what our brains trick us into believing. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's not just now. This has always been the case, and maybe we actually are getting more wise. Actually, I think we actually are headed in a direction of more, at least, compassion and understanding, and I think that does encapsulate some wisdom into it.
I hope you're right.
I do too. I am cautiously optimistic. You're nodding your head, Lauren. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase what I'm thinking. And so I was thinking about the difference between knowledge and wisdom. That's sort of what you reminded me of. Wisdom, I feel like it comes more from like living and learning maybe more from other people. Like there's this sense of, there's a reason we think of older people as wise, right? And that's this sort of gained knowledge over time and how things all contribute together, as opposed to knowledge is more like isolated. It's without as much context, maybe. And so I think that's sort of the difference. There's this lag between when you learn things and when you truly understand them.
So true.
I think there's also, I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
No, go ahead.
There's also a lag between when we learn something and when we actually contemplate it fully and really digest it and actually integrate it into like our broader belief system or our broader understanding of the world.
Yeah.
You know, so it's one thing to learn, you know, some sort of hard facts or data or, you know, gain insight into something like that. But taking a step back and seeing it within the larger context, kind of like Lauren was saying, the bigger picture. Yeah. That's where wisdom comes in. I agree with you.
It's more like contemplation, right? Like knowing something, but like what should you do with the knowledge? I feel like is when it transitions more into wisdom, right? So
I guess this is actually kind of matter of fact, isn't it? When you think about it, duh, you learn stuff before you actually know what to do with it.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit inevitable, I guess. And, you know, as much as we would love to like have a full understanding of all of the potential negative and positive consequences of a piece of knowledge, I think that's probably impossible to do beforehand, but I guess you just do your best.
Yeah, I mean, what's coming to mind is the Manhattan Project, right? Where the incredible pressure to be able to do something got the better of should we actually do something, and open up a big can of worms that we still really haven't been able to put the lid back on.
Yeah, or I don't know. The thing that came to mind for me was AI, right? Like it's exploding. It's like there's a lot of people taking a lot of innovation and dumping it at something really quickly without, to me, feeling like we're stopping to ask, like, should we do this? What is a good way to do this? And the wisdom feels like it's missing from that for me. But I think, like Nora said, it's sort of inevitable. That's just how it goes.
Yeah,
That's the direction my brain went into.
Yeah,
directly to AI.
Right.
I think something that's interesting though, so this is talking about velocity, right? So it's like gathers knowledge faster. And if you, the way that I kind of have like internalized or conceptualized AI specifically, but really I guess this applies not just to AI, but to a lot of things that are undergoing really rapid development and like rapid, especially in the tech realm, is you have this increase in knowledge, but it's exponential, right? So it's not just this like flat rate, it's ramping up so exponentially, kind of like you were saying, Lauren, that if we're learning, if we're interpreting and digesting and like contemplating things at the same rate, we're going to fall way behind, and just keep getting farther and farther behind the curve and have more and more information at our fingertips and not know what to do with it. But
yeah, it's a really good point, Dani. I feel like wisdom can't grow exponentially. It is really linear because it's with experience, and even when you put like 100 people in a room, the wisdom that might come out of that room, I feel like is very different than if you put 100 people in the room and ask them to like to develop some new type of technology. The leaps and bounds that might come out of that technology are going to be by far and away just more incredible than like the wisdom that they might come out, because it's more than just talking. It's experience. I
think one way you can kind of, it's like accelerate that process a little bit, like a little bit of a cheat code, not a cheat code, but you know what I mean, is like you were saying, Sam, like when you have more people in the room. So like by expanding like who you're getting input from and who you're learning from, I think that can really help kind of increase the rate at which you're gathering wisdom, rather than just relying on, one or two people or yourself, or like, I don't know, just the more perspectives you can get, I think it can accelerate that process a little bit.
Yeah, indeed. And yeah, I mean, I am in the process of facilitating dialogues between my staff where communication has broken down. And so I feel like this is like what we're talking about is like all about proactive and peaceful conversation, which unfortunately can be lost so easily, and can be so hard to restore. And I feel like that lies at the heart of individuals talking about wisdom together and actually promoting that. Any other thoughts? All right. Well, there you have it. Thank you, Isaac Asimov. So that moves us along to Astro 365, this day in astrophysics history. So in 1997, the Near-Earth Asteroid Rendezvous, NEAR, spacecraft passed within 750 miles of asteroid Matilda and took many multispectral images. So at that time, it was the closest pass to an asteroid. Now we've actually landed, or at least that the European Space Agency has actually landed on an asteroid, which is an absolutely amazing feat. So we've come a long way since 1997, but yeah, back in the day, 750 miles was the closest at that point. So that moves us along to everybody's favorite part of the Astro Show, the astronomy news quiz. Whew, I know. All right. So we've got Nora and Lauren with 1 point each, but we got a lot of questions, so it is anyone's game. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. Which country's first spy satellite was salvaged from the Yellow Sea by South Korean military authorities? Very close by South Korea.
North Korea?
North Korea! There is satellite. And Dani is on the board with 1 point. So we have a 3-way tie. Nicely done, Dr. Dani. All right. Into the second question. This Thursday, which commercial spaceflight company is launching their first flight of 2023? First one next year. Oh, what was that?
I was going to say Axiom, but I'm not actually sure that that's right.
No, it's not Axiom. No, they've already launched one this year.
Blue Origin?
Not Blue Origin.
Aerospace or SpaceX?
There's one more big
Rocket
player.
Lab?
Yeah. Rocket time. Yeah.
Think English Knight.
Oh, Virgin.
Virgin Galactic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't Virgin Galactic go bankrupt?
Apparently not quite.
Okay.
Because they're gonna launch again. It's like in 2 days. I think.
Cool.
Yeah, it's gonna, or maybe 3 days, like June 30th, I think, something like that. This Thursday, so a couple more days, 29th. All right, that brings Nora back in the lead with 2 points. Here we go. The Juicy Watermelon Space Telescope is studying exoplanet LP 890-9C for clues about habitability. Which planet in our own solar system is analogous to LP 890-9C's position?
Mars?
Good guess. Not Mars.
Venus?
Mercury?
Venus!
Hey.
No,
I think they're checking habitability. It's one of the 3, right?
They are.
On the edge of the Huddle Zone. That makes sense.
Yeah, we still don't know much about this planet yet. But in terms of its proximity to its star, it is analogous to Venus. So well within the habitable zone, which is really good news. All right, so we now have a 2-way tie. 2 points for Lauren and 2 points for Nora. Here we go. NASA's Scientific Visualization Studio released new simulation videos of the Earth being choked by what? We're already checking. What's that?
The sun?
Not the sun.
Carbon dioxide?
Carbon dioxide.
Ah.
Yeah, human emitted carbon dioxide. Yeah, this is not the long-term scenario that we are going for. This is making the planet Earth much more like Venus. Since we just talked about Venus, yeah, we're talking about runaway greenhouse effect type scenario here. No bueno. This would be really, really bad. So hopefully we can get our act together with this. Okay, that brings Lauren in the lead with 3 points. Okay, here we go. Astronomers have found that supermassive black holes in smaller galaxies are actually more likely to be doing what when they are in isolated cosmic voids? This is really weird.
Emitting jets?
You are so close.
Just like feeding on.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, it's feeding. Yeah, so it turns out that when meta-analysis was done on supermassive black holes in galaxy clusters versus galaxies that were out in voids, the supermassive black holes in smaller galaxies were more actively feeding when they were in the voids compared to in galaxy clusters. And maybe that makes sense to Lauren. I do not get why that would be. You're nodding your head, Lauren.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. If you're in a void instead of in a cluster as a small galaxy, you're more likely to have more gas for yourself. And so that would be maybe funneling in maybe also smaller things, maybe it's having some sort of more likely a merger event later on. It's like forming a little bit later in the universe, more things, and that would also bring in more gas into the center.
Got it. So the fact that it's a loner out there means that it was just able to suck up more when it was forming compared to
just have more stuff.
competing.
Yeah. A small thing falling into a cluster is going to start getting stripped of its gas, and then it's harder to feed a black hole. So that's my guess. I haven't read the paper.
That's
but
great. That's what I was missing. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. That now clears up that. But
but the black hole at the center of the cluster will be bigger. So like there's still big black holes. It's still doing a lot, just not in the small galaxies.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, nicely done. Wait, who got that one right? Was that was Nora? Okay, so now we're tied for 3 again. 3 for Nora and 3 for Lauren. Okay. This one is an oddball coming up right now. Just throwing that out there, but it's really, really cool. Okay. Several recent studies have shown that it was not quasars that cleared the primordial haze left over from the Big Bang, but rather what?
I don't know. Pulsars? I don't know. I don't.
It's a good guess.
These first stars.
Not stars, not supernovae.
Not too much else around.
It's just like, it's so ridiculously simple that it caught my attention. That's why I threw it up here. But this is what like 3 independent studies are all showing now about the clearing out of like the hydrogen that was just like basically like causing like optical cloudiness all over the early universe. It's always been thought that like the quasars and their jets were what was doing that. Now, these 3 different studies are all suggesting it's just ordinary galaxies. The idea is just that the ordinary galaxies, just from their own radiation, are causing the dissipation of all that hydrogen cloudiness.
Isn't the radiation in galaxies from stars?
True. We'll give you half a point, Lauren.
Okay, deal. I'll take it.
And yeah, I guess specifically it was like ultraviolet was the bandwidth that was noted in the article.
Yeah, that's the wavelength you need to ionize hydrogen is in the ultraviolet.
Yep. All right, so that gets Lauren ahead with 3.5 points. I think we should just give you the whole point. That's puts Lauren ahead.
That's okay.
Because it is indeed true that all galaxies are made up of stars.
Yeah.
That is a true statement. Okay, this next one is weird from a totally another perspective. I had no idea that these things even existed, but apparently they do now. Researchers have found that by shining a strong beam of light through 2 chemical compounds, an exotic new state of matter can be made called blank. Yeah.
I'm going to be able to guess this.
I just want to talk about it because it's really freaking cool.
I have no idea.
Yeah, I had no idea either. That's fine. Okay, so the 4th type of matter, or I guess actually 5th type if you include the Einstein-Bose concentrate. This one is now called the bosonic correlated insulator. Yeah. And
yeah,
so,
we guess that.
I know, right? Just on the tip of your tongue, right? The bosonic correlated insulator. The particles of this new type of matter are called excitons. I am not making this up. They're called excitons. It's basically when you pair an electron with what's called a fermion hole. Okay. I was not aware that fermion holes were a thing. They are.
An electron hole are a thing, so it's not a big leap.
Yeah, but apparently there are fermion holes. And so if you pair an electron with a fermion hole, and when you pressurize the compounds with this laser beam, and then you get this new state of matter called a bosonic correlated insulator. And apparently it might have all kinds of new applications with aerospace, and who knows what else. Yeah, never heard of that before, but it's the new beastie in the particle zoo. Excitons, bosonic correlated insulators.
New name. I get that it's descriptive, but
What's that?
I get that it's probably descriptive, but
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a good name. It's not catchy.
Yeah, it's not like charm quark.
Yeah.
That's also not a very good name, but in a different way.
Okay, moving on. All right. The Humanity in Deep Space Initiative is exploring blank, or the study of what and how astronauts eat on long missions off Earth.
Astrofarming. I don't know.
Very close.
Yeah. I actually get emails about this initiative. It sounds really cool.
Yeah.
Astrometabolism.
Astro agriculture.
You're all so close. Dani, want to take another stab at it? Has to do with digestion.
I don't know.
It is
astrobiology, but that's too broad.
Yeah,
So
right. It's neurogastronomy.
No.
Neurogastronomy. Yeah. That's what this one is. All right. Next question. Oh, yeah. Here are the folks who are doing the study.
Cool.
That wrap just floating in the middle with the pepperoni on it, that stresses me out.
Yeah, right.
You said it stresses you out? It's delicious.
It does, but it's just like there in the open. I don't know. It just seems like that should be in someone's hand or something.
It's not going anywhere.
What if they have to make a sudden stop?
There's a bigger problem on their hands than the pepperoni.
Yeah. Well, actually, we'll get back to things floating in space in a little bit. Yeah. But yeah, this is part of the study here. Okay. A newly released video features sonified data from which deep space collection of galaxies? And I'll give you a hint. It was one of the first galaxy cluster images that got released by the Juicy Watermelon Space Telescope. Real famous one.
Andromeda?
Think music. When you put
Stephan's Quintet.
Yeah, there you go. When you put 5 musicians together, what do you get? You get a quintet. They put it to music. I guess the way that they're interacting. Yeah, it sounds really, really cool. Definitely check it out. The sonified Stephan's Quintet data.
Cool.
All right. So that's another point for Nora. So again, two-way tie with 4 points with Nora and Lauren.
I'm bringing up the rear, guys.
Dani, there are 3 more questions. So if you get all 3, it's a 3-way.
You're still in this.
I think the chances are slim.
And Dani,
out of my zone here.
No, these next 2 are in your zone, Dani. They are. They
Okay.
are. All right, here we go. Which company has made more than 1,000 changes to its giant Starship rocket after it failed to perform its first launch in April?
SpaceX.
SpaceX! Yeah. They are still
Thanks, guys.
forward. Yeah. Yeah. They're still not even shooting for the moon. They're shooting for Mars. I still think that Elon will be the first on Mars. Any guesses? You think it's gonna be NASA or Elon?
I think it'll
Well, I
be
don't think it's gonna
collaborative.
be him personally.
Not him personally. I mean Starship as opposed to like the Orion spacecraft or some version of it.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't want to give credit for all the work that people are doing at SpaceX to him.
I agree. There are hundreds of amazing engineers at SpaceX that are doing all this work. He's just sleeping on the floor of the hangar yelling at them. But come on, anybody want to place a bet on who they think, which company or government agency will land the first spacecraft? human born spacecraft on Mars?
I think it'll be collaborative.
Collaborative.
I feel like it would be maybe a private company rocket, but a NASA mission.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah,
When-
I can see that too.
So like NASA astronauts on
the
Starship.
contract, yeah.
Correct.
With
That's what I mean.
SpaceX.
Yeah.
I know China's got some pretty big plans though,
That's true.
so I wouldn't put it past them either.
Fair enough. Okay, 2 more questions. Still a possibility for a 3-way tie. Here we go. The Experimental Aircraft Association's Aviation Museum in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, is honoring the United States' first commercial astronaut, blank, his name, with a full-scale replica of his ride, Spaceship One, and a collection of memorabilia from his career and the historic launch. The name of that first commercial astronaut in the U.S.
I don't actually know.
I didn't know either. That's a picture of him after just having landed on that craft. Mike Melville is his name. And he did this in his early 60s. This was 20 years ago in 2002, just over 20 years ago. Yeah, so he's in his 80s now. And the reason I mentioned earlier about the things floating in space. So one of the pieces of memorabilia that's going to be in this museum are the M&Ms that he had with them on this flight. And it was what he chose to bring up with him to like open up in zero gravity and like photograph the M&Ms floating in front of him.
It's not a bad choice.
That's a good choice, I think.
Cool, right?
Colorful, yeah. There's
Yeah.
multiple ones, so probably make some good photography.
Yeah, they're so small
apparently there's
enough.
some cool shots,
Yeah.
but then he had the wherewithal not to eat the M&Ms.
Oh, I
And
would
they're-
eat the
they're gonna-
M&Ms.
I mean, I might have eaten at least one. Apparently, they're all going to be a part of this display.
Did they
Yeah.
do something to them? Is this now an experiment on like how long? What's the length of life of
I
an
think
M&M?
M&Ms are like Twinkies; they last
forever.
as long as you don't break the candy shell.
That makes sense.
I think it's fine. Yeah. As long as you like keep them like below melting temperature, so it doesn't like crack the shell. I think you're good to go.
This thing has too many portholes in it. I don't like it.
Right?
It's
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah, like it has too many eyes, like a bug.
So, you know, I actually hadn't heard of this company, Space Composites. They were actually like the precursor to Virgin Galactic, and they basically use the same type of system. So this aircraft was lifted up to like 40,000 feet by a giant like jet plane, launched from 40,000 feet, and its rockets fired. It tilted up vertically, went up to like 340, 50,000 feet, and then descended, and then landed much like any jet-powered plane would. Yeah, it was pretty cool. Okay, there is still one more question remaining. Here we go. Which state legislature unanimously voted to establish a space exploration monument to honor its long association with space exploration?
Florida?
Florida!
I was gonna guess Ohio. So lots of
I was gonna
interesting
say
things.
Colorado.
I was torn
Yeah.
between Florida and Texas, but
Okay. Yeah.
Florida.
yeah.
Well, we have a 2-way tie. Oh no! Wait, no, that was
Oh,
the
Nora just won.
right. That was yeah, that was Nora. So Nora is our champion this
By a hair.
Nice.
Yeah.
Done.
At least 2 weeks, right? So reigning champion. It's like
Reigning
Jeopardy
champ.
now.
That's right. We're gonna start calling her Ken.
got a few times to go there.
Just a couple.
What was that record? It was ridiculous.
No
Oh, I
idea.
don't even remember the number. It was a lot though.
Yeah.
I do not have prize money that great for me. Sorry. Maybe someday. Not yet. All right. Well, that is the end of the astronomy news trivia quiz. I left this blank. There's really nothing new up right now. I mean,
Don't bother looking. Don't go outside.
Boring.
no, I mean go outside, but definitely look up into like the inky blackness of space because it's so cool. I mean, like the Milky Way is starting to make a really cool showing right now. Now that we're into the summer, so look to the east and southeast, and you'll see the Milky Way, rising 10:30ish. And then stay out even later until midnight, and it's really showing off. And then, but August is when the Milky Way is really doing its awesome display, when it's basically perpendicular with the horizon. That's when you really get an awesome show with that. But Jupiter and Mercury are still doing their thing in the east in the morning. Venus is still gorgeous in the western sky after sunset. But we've talked about that stuff already. So I just decided to leave it blank and just try to encourage people to just get out there and look up, because there's way more to see than what we can even come close to talking about in this segment of the show, or even on this entire show on a yearly basis. So go out there and look up. And you don't need much. You don't even need a telescope or a pair of binoculars. Bring a blanket and a cup of hot chocolate or Bailey's, whatever you'd like, and just stare up at the night sky for a while. It'll be awesome. All right, so that brings us to our guest spot with Dr. Dani. We got to update your bio here, Dani. But we will make sure we do that the next time you present. But yeah, really excited to hear about what you've been up to lately, and we've got your slideshow queued up, and so I'll go to the first slide for you, and
Perfect.
I will let you take it away.
Sounds good. So first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on the show and to get to be a part of the team. But in particular, to be able to share some updates on a project that is particularly near and dear to my own heart and the hearts of my teammates. So, and as you mentioned at the beginning, Sam, one of the things that I've been, I guess the title of this presentation, Aerospace Engineering and everything, is the purpose of some of the work that I've been doing, broadly speaking, in the different projects that I've been trying to weave into some of my prior work in medicine and surgery, is to create or establish an interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary way of approaching problems that we see in the broader space health arena. As I know, we've talked about at various points on this show and then in other contexts through Wyoming Stargazing, there are a bunch of problems that happen or issues that arise with the human body when you put a human in the spaceflight setting. And as it stands right now, we know some of these things, but there are many, many more things that we're just kind of scratching the surface on. And you can imagine it's one thing to put someone on the International Space Station for 6 months or a year, but it's a very different animal when we talk about putting boots back on the moon, or ultimately boots on the surface of Mars. And with all that involves, because it's not just a quick trip there and back, no big deal. It's between 6 and 9 months en route to Mars, for example. And then we spend, a year and a half on the ground there, and then 6 to 9 months back. So most folks are planning roughly on like 2.5 to 3 years as far as the duration of these missions. Lots of things can happen. And so there are lots of problems that we broadly speaking in this like space health tech community are trying to solve through creative solutions that look at things not only through the medical lens, but also through the lens of an engineer. So kind of having a combined or having a background in multiple things so you can speak different languages is really important to be able to leverage the broader experience of a whole big team. So with that in mind, I'm giving an update today on the biorobotic spacesuit glove project in particular. And I presented on this, I think, a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago. So it's been a little while, and it's come a long way. So what I was planning on doing is just, giving a rough overview of the project first, and then we'll dive into some of the updates. So you can skip ahead. And I'm sorry, just to go back one sec. At the bottom those are the names of my wonderful teammates, Spencer, Taylor, Allie, Tom, and Steve. And it's been extraordinary working with everybody. So, all right. let's move along. So here's a brief agenda in the next few minutes. We'll talk about the problems that we're solving, just refresh everybody's memory in case I'm sure folks have forgotten at this point. Talk about our solution, which is in 2 parts, which is fingertip protection and then also mitigating muscle fatigue for the purpose of performing operations in a spacesuit. And then talk about some of our benchtop test data and then certainly some future work, which is especially exciting. So, all right, next slide, please. Okay, so just to give a bit of background here, I don't know how many engineers might be watching this, but this image, and it might be a bit of an eye chart depending on what type of screen you're using, but it's actually from the bioastronautics group at CU Boulder, which is where I did my my graduate training in aerospace engineering and in engineering management with a focus in innovation. So those are the dual master's degrees that I've kind of leveraged, brought into this bigger medical picture. So on the left, it's from a person-centric view. So looking at risk, and on the right is from a vehicle-centric view. And we're looking at human risk in spaceflight relative to other types of risky behavior. And you'll notice that on this particular image, or in this particular image, spacewalks are not actually listed. They're not their own entity. And that's because, gratefully, we haven't actually had any fatalities, during or immediately after any spacewalks. However, spacewalks are widely regarded as one of the highest risk activities that a human being can possibly be involved in during space flight or during a space mission. And so that would put them in the top left-hand corner of these images. So anyway, next slide, please, just to kind of frame things for you. So to go into a little bit more detail, a spacewalk, which is also known in this arena as extravehicular activity, or EVA, is a very physically demanding and very high risk undertaking with an increased incidence of a variety of injuries relative to other activities. And so here, as I touched on earlier, we focused our design efforts specifically on optimizing the glove, the spacesuit glove itself. And a way to think about this, just to take one step back, a way to think about the spacesuit, broadly speaking, is it's like the world's smallest spacecraft, right? Because it needs to be able to do a variety of things. It's got to be able to allow you to breathe. It needs to allow you to move. It needs to provide a mechanism for, filtering not just air, but also like humidity, moisture. It has to be powered. There are all of these considerations. It's got to be pressurized appropriately. And so to be able to yield, to engineer into this mechanism an environment that's going to allow the human body to exist or to survive, it makes it the smallest spacecraft, smallest spacecraft ever. Anyway, so use of the pressurized glove as a part of this pressurized suit can lead to a bunch of injuries, especially fingernail injuries, as well as premature hand and forearm muscle fatigue. If you can imagine, and we see this actually both during simulations in the Neutral Buoyancy Lab at Johnson Space Center. It's a big giant pool. And then also during EVAs in flight or in mission. And the forearm muscle fatigue in particular is known to actually curtail the length of an EVA, where a typical EVA can last anywhere between 7 and 9 hours. Many of them have actually been cut short as a function of early fatigue with the repetitive manual movements that are required during these operations, using things like the pistol grip tool and gripping onto the side of the International Space Station. That's not a small thing, and that requires a lot of force exerted over a long period of time. So we set out to fix this. So next slide, please. And lots of progress with glove augmentation, like grip force augmentation specifically, has been made in the terrestrial setting in the last 15 years or so, including a bunch of work that actually was done at NASA on the Robo glove, which is at right on the screen here, in tandem with General Motors. But most of the robotic glove designs, even to date, are still really bulky, really power intensive, and they may not even provide enough enough force augmentation to be worthwhile and to even effectively reduce muscle fatigue. So it's kind of this battle, right? You want it to be not too bulky, not too intensive. You don't want it to overpower the task that you're trying to perform, but at the same time, to generate just the right amount of force to augment what you're doing, to kind of make you superhuman in a sense, to be able to do whatever tasks you need to do with less muscle force required would be ideal. So additionally, despite a number of refinements and improvements and everything before the release of the Phase 6 glove, which folks on this call or in this group might remember in the last couple of years, astronauts are still prone to nail bed injury, either during training in the pool or in mission. And actually, to date, around 50% of astronauts with EVA experience have sustained nail bed injuries, and many have actually lost fingernails altogether during these operations, which is it's baffling to a lot of folks, including myself. But I've seen it firsthand, so no pun intended. It really does happen. So,
nice.
Yeah, thank you. Next slide, please. Not intentional, I promise. Next slide, please. So, well, again, while these may seem like really trivial problems in the grand scheme, considering the context of planetary surface operations, or exploration of different planetary surfaces on the moon or on Mars, we expect that frequent and even daily EVA is going to be a really critical mission component. So with that in mind, repeated nail bed trauma, imagine day after day after day, can actually lead to permanent musculoskeletal damage. It can lead to infections, a lot of scarring, can lead to a global reduction in crew effectiveness with daily tasks. It can lead to, potentially like loss of fingers. I mean, especially knowing or having some of the insights that I have from the surgical side, because my regular day job is in general surgery, a chief resident, there's a lot to think about there. And so we're trying to kind of take some of those insights and say, hey, this could be a real problem. How can we prevent this from happening, or prevent this from even being a thing once we make it to Mars? Let's nip it in the bud now. So next slide, please. So essentially, we established two projects running in tandem, and this slide might look familiar. It's very similar to one that I had shown the last time that I presented this a couple of years ago, because I think it kind of sets the stage for really what we're doing. But we basically have taken these two projects and integrated them into a single device. And so I want to highlight here that our team has, and I touched on this at the beginning, but our team's gone out of its way to really take an interdisciplinary approach to solving these problems, and to integrating these different components into one really cohesive whole. And so we had a wonderful opportunity to speak directly with some current and former crew members who've had personal experience, not only with EVAs, but also with like loss of fingernails or fingernail bruising and whatnot. And Steve Robinson, one of the members of our team, actually had gave some insight into the direction of the pain that he was experiencing. He felt that it was in the plane of the nail bed, as demonstrated by the red arrow that's in that image there, whereas some other folks on some more recent flights have experienced more pain in this direction. And the reason that's important is, that suggests to us that there really are multiple factors involved here, but one way or another, we need to be able to establish a solution that's going to fix it regardless of the exact, direction of the stress or of the pressure. And so, it's unclear if there are two different mechanisms. It's unclear if the presence of a higher level of humidity is a factor as well. Unclear. However, we think that we are onto something with the solution that we've created. So next slide, please. All right. So I think I was wondering if there's going to be an issue with those pictures in the middle. So there are two pictures that are supposed to show up right smack in the middle of that slide. But basically, first we created a solution for this nail delamination issue. We felt like that was slightly lower hanging fruit than the grip force augmentation mechanism. And in developing what we ultimately developed as a fingertip cap, our goal was to not just put like a fancy thimble. That was not what we were doing, but to create some sort of mechanism that would actually protect the most distal portion of the fingertip and redirect forces more proximally to an area of more robust blood supply, because the blood vessels that are at the very tip of the finger are A, very small and easy to compress, and B, there's not a lot of redundancy. So this is where that kind of multidisciplinary approach comes into play, where somebody on the surgical side of things says, oh, it's very hard to get a fingertip to heal, especially in a low oxygen environment. And if there's prolonged pressure on the fingertip, then there's going to be, and this happens repeatedly, you're going to end up with trauma to that fingertip. And so part of how we looked at this is we actually incorporated a pulse oximetry sensor into the fingertip mechanism. And then we said, okay, what happens when we press this down for a long period, as if we're performing certain tasks on the ISS, using this glove? What happens if you press this down for a long period of time? Oh, you actually do generate reduced oxygenation. So we had evidence, we had hard data evidence that actually less oxygen was getting to the tissue at the very tip of the finger. And then ultimately we were able to create a design that protects the finger. It's offset just enough to not allow any forces to actually hit the tip of the finger, but rather to be redirected like here instead. I don't know if you guys can see that, right? Mm-hmm. And that but it doesn't feel like ET, so it's not like you have these really long, long thimble things over your fingers. It's just very short, offset a very, very slight amount. And it's been very effective, actually. So we've incorporated this design into the bigger picture. All right, so next slide, please. This is actually the evolution of our initial prototype, which was easily malleable. Anybody who's got experience in the tech design world knows you start with really inexpensive, like supplies and tools and things, and then you just it allows you to iterate more quickly and more inexpensively than if you were to just go, full up with the fanciest stuff, because then you feel like you're kind of strapped in a lot of ways unnecessarily. So anyway, so it's evolved, as you can see there, into, from this initial prototype into a fully functional 3D printed scalable cap that's, as I mentioned, offset from the fingertip just enough to prevent or minimize capillary compression and let us redistribute forces effectively. So, okay, next slide, please. So for the force augmentation mechanism, we focused on creating a structure that could give these, or that had these features in mind. So we wanted to make sure there was grip assist. And so what I mean by that is when somebody goes to grab something like the rail on the ISS or the pistol grip tool, we wanted it to be that they wouldn't just grab it and have to keep grabbing it. We wanted it to be that they grab it and they can relax the hand, and this device keeps gripping for them. And so that makes it that they can relax entirely, or at least relax the hand entirely, during a variety of different activities, and save those muscles from getting really, fatigued really early. So the grip lockout was especially important. We wanted to make sure that there were low power requirements for obvious reasons, right? You've got this little spacecraft with a power unit on it, on your back, and you need to make sure that it fits into the bigger picture of all the different devices that are incorporated into the spacesuit that also require power. So this is actually very, very low power relative to other things. And then it needed to be low profile so that it could be really smoothly integrated into the Phase 6 glove design, which is kind of encasing, or the plan is for it to encase all of this stuff. And that's one of our next steps. So with this in mind, we based our whole design around biomimicry, replicating the annular flexor tendon pulley system of the hand. There were a couple images in one of the prior slides that speak to this effect, but you can see it here as well, where instead of going on the back of the hand with our device, we actually focused on the front of the hand, because that truly mirrors human anatomy, and we felt that it would feel more natural. And so far, that seemed, what we're gathering seems to be in support of that. So next slide, please. And so, as I mentioned, when you're doing tech development, you start, you start cheap and go from there. So we did this digital mock-up all the way on the left, and then gotta love some duct tape. And then we took it to, the next step, where we had our earliest, more functional prototype. And you can see here, we actually were originally thinking of incorporating more fingers for the spacesuit glove specific version of this. And then what we realized over time that actually it really wasn't necessary. We'll get into that a little bit later, but next slide, please. So we performed some prelim testing to gather some insights on device functionality. And this was actually what led us to omit the index finger and the pinky fingers, because the pinky finger was kind of irrelevant for our purposes. It wasn't generating that much like stabilizing force. And it wasn't the muscles that feed that pinky finger weren't really fatiguing very early. It was some of the muscles that were really responsible for moving the other fingers that were the ones to target. So anyway, so we zeroed in on the third and fourth digits, which are the ring and the middle fingers, to make sure that we were augmenting grip force without sacrificing manual dexterity too. And so that's why we omitted actually the index finger. We wanted it to be that if somebody was gripping a drill or pistol grip tool or something similar, they could still use the trigger and not have it be that this device was interfering. So next slide, please. So based on our initial mock-up and then our first iteration and some due diligence and all of these things combined, we learned a whole bunch of lessons related to things like cable selection, tendon placement, whether or not to engage the thumb, which, spoiler alert, we chose not to, and all these things. So next slide, please. And it looks like it There's a bit of a formatting error there. That's okay. So in order to make sure that we were targeting the same hand and forearm muscle fatigues that were responsible for the early muscle fatigue that we saw in EVA, we actually did some preliminary joint torque simulations where we used specific software. It's free. It's called OpenSim, to model muscle tendon architecture, and then we simulated flexion of the index finger and flexion of some of the other fingers. So this was not just kind of on a whim. We did our due diligence to make sure that we were looking at the right stuff. So, all right, so you can go to the next slide now. So that was all the background work. That was, again, it was completed over a year and a half ago, and I've already shared some of this stuff in this forum previously, but version 2 followed. So this is version 2 with a bunch of like 0.1, 0.2, 0.3s in between. But we focused on optimizing the electrical system. We wanted to make sure we maximized its utility for the spaceflight, the spaceflight setting in particular. And also we really prioritized safety. So we wanted to make sure that the device defaults to the off position to avoid any possibility that a malfunction could make it that somebody is stuck, right? Or they are gripping the side of the ISS and they can't release it. And, that would create a problem where one didn't exist previously, and that would be pretty catastrophic potentially, so not only on the ISS, but also on the surface of another planet. Believe it or not, the trigger mechanism has actually been one of the more challenging things to engineer. We experimented with a whole bunch of different things, and we've got patents pending on all of these things. But we thought about using like an ulnar deviation mechanism, which is kind of like an ulnar flick, because it was an isometric contraction. The spacesuit glove doesn't actually articulate in that direction. It articulates up and down like this, and you can turn like this, but you can't do this movement, if that makes sense. So we were thinking of taking advantage of that. And it turned out, even though that might be feasible in zero gravity, in the presence of any component of gravity, like Martian gravity or even lunar gravity, it was going to be awkward. It was certainly awkward under 1G. So we just kind of tossed that one out, at least for now. We thought about doing voice control, which has its own issues. It's pretty reliable, but you have to think about it. And our goal is really to make it be that this is something where somebody can grip something, and this device just naturally helps them, and then naturally releases when they go to let go of whatever device they're trying to let go of. So it's supposed to be, not require any thought. So with that in mind, we landed on EMG, or electromyography. And so that's where there are little sensors that are put on, overlying certain muscles, muscle bellies in particular, that pick up on which muscles are contracting above a certain threshold, and you can titrate, you can set those thresholds to tell the glove mechanism when to activate. And then, we use that as a way for the glove to essentially learn how and when to trigger, or how and when to activate and to augment that force. So next slide, please. So I wanted to show some of our early benchtop data. Again, this is from a little more than a year ago at this point, to figure out, to give you guys a sense of where we landed in terms of how much force augmentation we are essentially intending to provide. So the Robo Glove that was developed, in decades past or in years past, is capable of providing about 15 pounds of force augmentation. So we set that as a benchmark, and then we examined the amount of force that our glove could generate using the pulley diameter that was in essentially our initial functional prototype. And the result, without changing a thing right off the bat, we were able to generate 14.8 pounds, where the gold standard was 15. And that was actually, so that was wonderful news to us. That was music to our ears, because that was like, oh, okay, so we essentially more or less hit the target on the first go around. So we're essentially now more in the finessing mode, or the fine tuning mode. So, the force numbers were slightly lower than the Robo Glove target, because the current was actually higher than that. The current that our wires were carrying were actually higher than the wires that we used could handle. They actually melted the first go around, which is an easy fix. We just pick new wires. Again, keep costs low so you can iterate quickly and respond when you learn new things. And then what we realized also is that the motor capabilities were greater than we needed. So we were able to scale things down versus up, and kind of optimize slip through the mechanism and all that stuff. So anyway, so you can go to the next slide. So some of the improvements that we made as we were building this, what was ultimately a locking passive rail system, are we improved the locking mechanism itself. We developed a slimmer, more streamlined locking or like rail system. And then we integrated a new motor that was more in line with the specifications we were looking for. And then we just kind of slimmed out the packaging on the whole. So that's kind of what we're working with right now. Next slide, please. And so with our revised motor, we actually repeated our benchtop testing using a grip fort or a hand dynamometer. If anybody's seen one, I should have put a picture up so folks could see exactly how we were doing this benchtop testing. But basically, it's a thing that you squeeze to measure how much force you're applying when you grip something. And we found a 20% increase in gear reduction, which generated a like greater maximum force augmentation, essentially up to like 23-ish pounds before the motor stalled. And that was with streamlining and titrating things to optimize it for our purposes. We don't need much more force than that. At least it doesn't appear that we need that much force, much more force than that based on what we've seen. So you can go to the next slide. So here's kind of how it's looking right now with some additional modifications, which I'll show you in the next slide. So our team's work, you can move one slide forward. There we go. So our team's work on the EMG side of things is what we're really getting excited about now. So that part is ongoing. And so the goals of this arm of the project are, as you can see here. So the EMG work was actually recently picked up for publication. I'll be presenting that in July in Calgary at a conference up there. That's actually on spacesuit related stuff specifically. There'll be lots of brilliant people to ask about these things, who've been involved in this kind of work much longer than we have. But the goal is to figure out exactly. We think we've dialed in the location for the sensors, but to figure out exactly how best to integrate an EMG type of sensor mechanism into the design, what force threshold to use, and all of those things. That's going to take some more fine tuning, which gratefully we love this stuff, so it works. So next steps on the next slide. In addition to further EMG testing, we've got some pressurized glove box testing coming up. So it's one thing to, do these studies at, ambient pressure and temperature, but it's another thing entirely to do it in a pressurized glove box or a depressurized glove box that allows it to function as if it were a pressurized glove. So there's the glove box that we had been planning to use at CU Boulder had some technical difficulties, but it sounds like it's coming back online pretty soon. So that's pretty exciting. And then something I think I mentioned to you guys before we actually jumped on here about adapting the device to some other really exciting use cases. That's coming down the pipeline too. So with all that being said, I think on my next slide, these are some publications that are actually on this project. And then there's a fourth one that just got picked up. And then on the next slide are some references. We've got a whole bunch more where those came from, if ever anybody's interested. And with that, following slide, I'm happy to take some questions. So thanks.
That was great, Dani. Very cool. So when did you first start working on this project?
Oh gosh, it was in January 2021.
Okay.
Yeah, it was actually a class project that for one of our master's classes, and a few of us got together and we were like, we've been thinking about this for a while, and about creating something like this because people talk about losing your fingernails and on spacewalks, which is baffling, but that's still a problem. And then the more we looked into it, it's like, oh, actually, there are some other issues too that we could maybe tackle simultaneously, and then it just kind of fed from there. So the University of Colorado bioastronautics group actually provided a little bit of discretionary funding, like a couple thousand, to help get us off the ground and provide, a mechanism to purchase some of these supplies, which is wonderful. And then, but it's fed from there. There's been a fair bit of interest, which has been really exciting. So, and we're having fun with it. It's a labor of love.
Yeah. That's super cool. I mean, a couple of years, you guys have accomplished a ton in a couple of years.
Thanks. We appreciate that. So yeah, it's been fun. And it's something that we've had an opportunity to present it in a bunch of different fora. And what we find is that, So at a medical conference, you get a certain set of feedback. You get insights into certain component or certain aspects of this. You present it at an engineering specific conference and you get entirely different, sets of feedback with insights and things. So that's part of why we're really looking forward to the spacesuit conference. Essentially, it's the environmental control and life support system conference. Really, that where I think we're going to get some good feedback and hopefully some helpful insights to make it that we can not just create this thing and refine it, but also integrate it into an operational suit. Because that's really the goal, right? To support mission effectiveness, or have some version of this down the line support mission effectiveness and human health in the process.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very cool.
Thanks.
Is this like the type of thing that would have to be completely customized to the individual, or would it be like, small, medium, large sizing or something?
Yeah. So it's interesting you asked that, because it's one thing for the mechanism, like the basic glove portion and the fingertip caps. The fingertip caps are very easy to customize, and so that probably would be something that would be customized to the individual. But the most important component to customize is probably going to be the EMG stuff, because
that makes sense.
It would be a pre-flight type of thing where we would map out, using like certain technology, we would map out the forearm musculature on these individuals and say, okay, so your hotspots are here and here and here. We're going to put the sensors there, and maybe even implant something. That might be an option down the line, remains to be seen. Or tattoo it and say, okay, great. When you go before an EVA, like the sensors need to go here and here, and then have them do their thing that way. Especially for some of the more like labor intensive or manual labor intensive EVAs, we'd be able to facilitate that with this mechanism. And something I didn't really go into too much is that there's a really exciting potential for machine learning here. And our what we anticipate is that as we start implementing the glove, we'll need to set the force threshold for a given individual when they're using a device, the force threshold to, like, okay, don't activate until maybe, and this is just for example, a 60% muscle exertion, or 60% muscle contraction. But as the glove learns how a particular individual contracts their muscles and some of those patterns, in a perfect world, the threshold could be really, really low, to where the glove would smoothly start activating at like 10% or something like that muscle contraction. And it would be able to figure out that trajectory and say, oh, hey, how can I can more effectively augment force and have a smoother onset by starting when you're only contracting those muscles 10%, and then have it be a smooth, transition to the full grip lockout. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that is super cool.
So, it's a process, right? So it's like going from and you see oftentimes like tech in its early stages, it's kind of like, it's like not quite smooth, but as it progresses and as it's evolved or as it evolves and as it's refined, it becomes a smoother thing. So machine learning will be helping us with that process.
That is super cool. I love the concept of the glove actually being able to like optimize for each individual as it learns that individual's muscular like patterns. That's super cool.
Thanks.
That makes me wonder, like, how many movements are you designing or optimizing for, right? Because I'm sitting here thinking, like, my full articulation of my hand is a lot, but if I only needed to do 3 things with this, then it's a different problem. So you start small and get big, but I'm like sitting here wiggling my fingers thinking.
Yeah,
a lot going on, right?
Yeah, it's really complicated. Yeah, but if 50% of the time you need to grip something like this, and then the other 40% of the time you're holding something like, you know what I mean? Then
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that actually is one of the bigger challenges, because there are so many movements that you can perform with your hands. And so we have to filter part of the challenge with this has been filtering out the movements that would be like a false trigger, to say, oh, okay, well, so let's say somebody is just like resting their hand like this, we don't want that to be a trigger for the grip, force, and then all of a sudden people are like, we don't want that. And so that's part of why, it's like a learning process, and there's going to be some sort of force threshold to where it's not just relaxing in this, in this position, but it's got to be a a certain amount of force contraction, a muscle contraction, a certain amount of force applied to something to say, okay, yeah, that was intentional. That was an intentional grip of something. Therefore, let's activate this mechanism smoothly to be able to, augment. So yeah, it's a complicated problem.
Yeah, because even just like pointing is pretty similar to grabbing something, right?
Yep.
And they're not the same thing. Yeah.
So that was part of our prelim bench testing, actually, because we wanted to get some of that mechanism dialed in. And so, yeah, and that's actually part of why EMG is especially useful in this mechanism, or we anticipate it will be, based upon some of our tests so far, because we can get at some of the deeper muscles and filter out some of the noise. So we've got a whole bunch of data coming down the pipeline that speaks to some of that stuff, but it's fun. Again, we nerd out on this stuff and absolutely love it. So.
I was thinking, not that you want this outcome at all, but I'm like envisioning like these amazing blooper videos as you're spinning the glove as it holds like a little like container of milk or like toothpaste. It might be like a great like early testing and like after like mastery type stuff to like show potential donors like this is where we started and like this is where we are today.
That's a good idea. I'm gonna have to float that one by the team. I think I really love that.
I just thought of a totally new application for this, Dani, that I don't know if you've thought about. I was thinking the cattle industry. My guess is there would be a lot of cows out there that would really appreciate just the right amount of force when they get milked. And way better for the small scale farmer who's actually doing the whole milking, that they actually have an assist as opposed to like that strength like in their muscles. Like if they're milking like a 50, 60 cows, like I'm not even like only half joking about this. This could be really, really cool.
It's true.
How many farmers are actually milking by hand anymore, though?
I bet there are a lot of small farms that do this. I'm talking about decentralizing the cattle industry here.
We will look into that, Sam. We'll report back.
This could be like the greatest thing for the cattle industry since Temple Grandin came on the scene.
Here we go.
Yeah. Temple Grandin. She's like the absolutely amazing. What is her title? I don't even know. She's a biologist, but she designed humane cattle processing plants based on her insight into cow like bovine behavior. Amazing work. So this could be the next big step in the cattle industry. I know it's not what you're going for, but
it's okay. You never know where tech is going to take you.
There's a lot of money to be had in the cattle industry. I actually know a guy who does like research work for the cattle industry. If you're interested in an inn, you might be able to get your foot in the door.
I mean, from the cow fields to the stars,
Hey, I like that. From the pastures to the stars. I mean, that's the tagline of bio design. From pastures to the stars. Every application from Earth to the cosmos.
That's right. Now, I did want to mention this device is not actually something that I'm developing through Orbital Biodesign. There are some other technologies that are through there. This is a team project through a different organization.
Okay.
But yeah. So, but I love this stuff enough to just do a lot of it. So I feel very lucky. But anyway.
Well, we're a bit over time, so we should probably wrap things up. But Dani, you are a special guest, and I always like to ask our special guests, what is the one question that you wish everybody would ask you, but nobody ever does?
I should have been prepared for this. I've seen enough of these episodes, or been on enough of these episodes now, but I actually hadn't come up with my question. I guess, maybe what do I think is the one biggest problem that needs to be handled in the space health arena in order to facilitate life on another planet? And this may seem obvious, but to a lot of folks, it's definitely not, because there are so many other risks and other challenges involved. But in my mind, it's the distance that is involved in this process. And the reason that that's important is for a number of reasons related to resource availability when you're that far away. And, when you're like hundreds of thousands of miles from Earth, you can't just turn around and pop over and be like, I need some extra Neosporin, that's like not an option. Or I need to have surgery. Can you hook me up? And so figuring out how to get around those problems or prevent those problems, like with devices like this, this glove, I think that's the biggest issue. So it takes people becoming really creative or getting, applying their imaginations to these problems to say, hey, how can we creatively solve issues that we think might arise when we're really far away from home and medical issues arise, or pop up, and and how can we solve them in the resource constrained setting too? So, yeah.
Nice. Dani, thanks so much for sharing all that with us. That was really, really cool stuff. And I can't wait to see these gloves on the hands of astronauts or dairy farmers.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks again to you and our other co-stars for being here this evening. Wouldn't have the Astro Show without you. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your expertise and a few good laughs, as always. I appreciate that. Thanks to all the folks behind the scenes, Maggie, our operations director, Stargazing board of directors, all of her donors, and those of you who are watching tonight live and who will watch this recording later on. Thanks for being here with us. We wouldn't keep doing the show without you. So thank you for being here. We'll see you next time in a couple weeks. But until then, be well and don't forget to look up. We'll see you then. Bye.